Oneindia News, and welcome back to our weekly show, Global Chit Chat, where we discuss the top developments in international politics with our guest, Mr. Tridivesh Singh Mani. Hello, sir. How are you doing?
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
Welcome back to our show. Sir, today we'll be speaking about China and its economic slowdown due to the COVID-19 crisis. Reports have arrived that Chinese authorities have they are planning to further cut taxes and increase administrative fees. Like they are handling their COVID crisis, and in the strict handling of this crisis, they are trying to revive their economy. So, how do you think that China is going to revive the economy? President Xi Jinping also said that it's their top priority is to stabilize the economy. How do you think that they are going to revive the economy in the backdrop of such strict lockdowns nationwide?
So you very rightly pointed out that the first challenge at this point of time is the outbreak of the pandemic, right? Now, China has been maintaining a zero COVID strategy, which is evident from its regulations with regard to international air travel, with regard to the stringent lockdowns, and in certain cases, the lockdowns have even begun to impact global supply chains, as we had discussed earlier. Now, the problem is that it's a very fine balance. So at this point of time, there are analysts who are arguing that if the pandemic, if it spreads more, it could also lead to social problems. But as it is, the lockdowns have been so stringent that they have impacted the economy and they have led to discomfort for the public as well, right? But this is not the only problem. The disruptions introduced, disruptive policies, which Xi Jinping thought would be successful in preventing the disproportionate sort of expansion of capital, which has led to economic disparities, which has also led to the exodus of Chinese businessmen. Some of the policies have been very stringent, and along with also, of course, things like some of the environmental policies. COVID-19 is not the only challenge. There have been other disruptions. Now, if these disruptions, when you bring out any sort of economic policy which is disruptive in nature, you really don't know the outcomes. From your point of view, you're either looking at, if you look at from the point of view of the environment, if you look at it from the view of checking growing inequalities, it may seem fine, but you really don't know the outcomes. And so this is not only peculiar to China, but added to that is also the point about the way the COVID-19 has panned out. And what is important is that other countries which are following the zero COVID strategy in the West, they have moved away. They have realized that this is not sustainable economically and even otherwise, that this is not going to be possible. But China is still sticking to that. But now, some of the remarks by senior officials obviously are important. And so they have obviously taken note of the fact that, it's all right to bring about some course corrections, for instance, in the real estate market, also in terms of coal production, to meet your climate change goals, and to send out the right messages globally. But you can't have the economy slowing down considerably, because that has been the the leverage which China has had globally in the last few years has been its economy. Now, if that is impacted, all your even things like the Belt and Road Initiative, your economic engagement and outreach with the rest of the world will get impacted. So you have to send out the signaling that that you're on top of the situation and you won't allow the economy to slow down further. This also obviously raises the point. This underscores the point that there probably would be some sort of difference of opinion between Xi Jinping and other leaders, prominent leaders within the Communist Party as well, that to what extent do you want to introduce these policies. I think three things emerge. One is that domestically, that you don't want, basically it's a catch-22 situation as well. If you allow, for instance, COVID, if with an outbreak, you could have social problems, but with The stringent measures, also you're creating hardships, a lot of things which are not even reported, and then when you look at the economy also, if you a course correction may be needed, but doing a course correction may send out the message that the earlier policies were not appropriate, and they did not really achieve the desired goals. In fact, on the other hand, they were counterproductive. So these are certain problems. But to send out the correct message globally, I think some sort of course correction will be made, because the domestic economy and the performance of the economy is linked to, as I said, important projects, China's, especially the Belt and Road Initiative. So as it is, there's been a slowdown also in the last year of a number of BRI projects. Though now, if you look at the visit of the Chinese foreign minister to a number of countries which are part of the BRI, the signaling was obviously that China is very much on top of things. And if you look at the visit in Sri Lanka, for instance, China wanted to set out a message that it is send out a message that it is in command. So I think this also, I mean, even globally, this is a sort of a lesson that, while the Chinese model has been hailed and it has achieved success over the past 4 decades or so, but the success was achieved due to opening up. The more you centralize, the more, and also even when you have to, if you want a course correction, if you want to reduce inequalities, you need a sort of balance. Economic policies also cannot be excessively reactive. It's important to strike a fine balance, and also you don't want to send out the wrong message even to entrepreneurs and all, because you also need to distinguish between genuine entrepreneurship.
Right. So in the light of Chinese entrepreneurs that you just pointed out, there are reports that China is planning to extend tax cuts for small and micro firms. So do you think that's gonna somehow help the improvement of the economy, in improving the economy, or do you think that it's gonna further create another problem among the Chinese entrepreneurs?
I think doing a course correction it'll have to be incremental. It can't be sudden, because as I said, then it shows that the policy, there's no that the policy is, there's a sort of woolly-headed sort of approach to these issues. So you have to do it in a very incremental manner. You can't suddenly now take a total U-turn. Right. But obviously, it will send out a positive signal to entrepreneurs, and also even to international businesses also. I mean, if you look at when China was able to, the period where it was able to attract international investments and all, when it was more open, as I said, when the open door policy reforms, which Xi Jinping has tried to, after 2014-15, he has wanted to leave his own legacy. He has reversed some of the economic policies, and he's moved back. I mean, I wouldn't say, it's very tough to define Xi Jinping, that whether he's like Mao Zedong or he's like Deng Xiaoping, but some of the policies are more closer to that of the Mao Zedong era, at least perceptibly, maybe not on the ground. So that is another challenge.
So again, in the light of COVID-19 and China, China has also imposed strict border controls, and for that, its neighboring countries like Myanmar, Vietnam, they are also suffering. So do you think that, or can you just elaborate on how these neighboring countries are coping in the current scenario in regard with the border controls?
Yeah, so again, you have very stringent sort of, one, you have the checks, various commodities. So I think, for instance, in certain cases, if you look at agricultural commodities from Vietnam, and then from Myanmar, they have been stranded for weeks at the border, at the border with China, the land border with China. And then, and obviously, if you look at Vietnam and Myanmar, they are dependent. I mean, China is the largest market for some of their commodities, especially the fruits, some of the fruit and other agricultural products as well, right? So that one is the checks, the regulate, that is a problem as it is, which has resulted, because I think a few weeks ago, I think in China, there was a case where some of the dragon fruit which had come in, that was contaminated After that, China has become even more cautious. And as I said, because of the upcoming Beijing Winter Olympics, they're being very cautious generally. So especially on certain fruit, which comes from Myanmar and from Vietnam, they're even more strict. Of course, even other agricultural commodities have been suffering. Then when you look at the case of Laos, China also imports, it's not just agricultural commodities, but minerals and other products. So even they have been facing problems. And what is the major challenges that for these commodities now? So somebody from Myanmar or from Laos or from Vietnam, they have to also change the trucks. So the truck only go inside, enter China with the Chinese truck, which means unloading the products and causing damage. So this has created problems. Now the question is, will this also, as far as Vietnam is concerned, Vietnam has said that there's a political messaging, because that China is doing this because Vietnam has taken an independent stance in foreign policy. Obviously, its ties with the US have improved. Vietnam is part of the Indo-Pacific. It's not been critical of AUKUS. Its stance has been different. That's one thing. But other countries, if you look at Myanmar, it has a very strong relationship, robust relationship with China, even Laos. But still, if one were to leave the geopolitics aside, the question is, will the ASEAN countries also now begin to look, will this force them to look for other markets, for instance, and will, say, Japan step in? How would South Korea react? How would some of the other Western nations react to this situation? Because obviously, not to the same scale, but there are opportunities. And obviously, it can't be land-based trade, but you have to. So that's one thing which you need to look at. But most importantly, it's also a sort of, if you look at ASEAN itself, Cambodia, for example, is clearly moving. It has been in the Chinese orbit, at least the government, not the people necessarily, but the government has been moving closer towards the Chinese orbit. Then you have Vietnam, and then you have some countries which are trying to balance out between the US and China, and even Japan as well. So I think it would be interesting to see the impact also on how more than just the China ASEAN economic. How does ASEAN react to this? And because there have, and if you look at ASEAN, otherwise, for very long in areas like infrastructure, for instance, it is Japan which has had the edge. While we talk about the Belt and Road Initiative, we talk about China's influence over there, Japan. So there are other players. It's just that there has not been one unified strategy. Now, can the Indo-Pacific, under the umbrella of the Indo-Pacific, can some of the countries provide an alternative to China? I think that is something which needs to be explored.
So, sir, you have been speaking of the Southeast Asian countries and Southeast Asian countries. So, China is also currently dealing with the Gulf countries. So, the foreign ministers from Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Oman, Bahrain, and also the Secretary General of the Gulf Cooperation Council are on a 5-day visit in Beijing right now. So reports said that these GCC ministers are expected to discuss energy ties with China. So do you think that is going to help China cope with this economic crisis, or do you think it's just going to be another political dialogue?
Okay, so yes, very rightly said that basically China would not, due to the unrest in what is happening in Kazakhstan, China is concerned about its energy needs. Though I would like to say that Saudi Arabia accounts for about 16%, as of 2020 accounted for 16% of China's energy needs. If you look at crude oil, for instance, right? Now, the other, and even other countries like, for instance, Oman, it was not in the top 5, but Oman and some other GCC countries also are important. So the energy relationship has been there since. Then Xi Jinping has been speaking about doubling, trade between GCC and China by 2023. There's repeatedly Saudi Arabia has said that we would want to align our Vision 2030 with the BRI. China has said that it will support Vision 2030 and other similar initiatives of GCC countries to diversify from oil, to reduce the dependence basically upon oil. So China has been repeatedly saying that. So this relationship has grown. It's not in overnight. And even the negotiations, if you look at the talk about this FTA, these negotiations have also been going on since 2004. So, right. What is important is to see the current geopolitical landscape. So first is that the ties between the US and UAE, for instance, have witnessed a deterioration because of this, the China factor, right? Because of for instance, the use of Huawei in its 5G technology, the Khalifa port, one part of the Khalifa port, which the United States said was a military installation. So UAE has, for instance, cancelled an agreement for the purchase of F-23, jets. So UAE has said that it does not want to be trapped in this whole China-US thing. Then you have Saudi Arabia also. Saudi Arabia, traditional ally of the US, but in terms of security, it has been moving closer to China, right? And even it's, in fact, some of the recent reports also suggest that this security cooperation is further getting enhanced, and much to the chagrin of Washington, D.C. So this China factor in the Middle East in terms of security is something new now. This is, the economic part was always there, but the security part is important. So that is one thing which we need to look at. Second thing is the Biden administration's approach towards the GCC. That has been very different from that of Trump. So probably in a veiled sort of message to Washington, GCC countries are saying, okay, we have other options. We want to move closer to China. Then the US in recent days, as it is, has also been trying to reduce its oil dependence upon the GCC countries. And on the other hand, China, as far as China is concerned, the GCC countries, it's a reliable market, right? So, and finally, of course, the fact that Iran has moved considerably closer to China, and obviously GCC will not be comfortable with this. So, building the energy relationship, then obviously, if you look at this, your FTA, and finally, in the aftermath of the pandemic, all GCC countries have suffered, and they would want to see that, how Chinese investments can help in helping them achieve their vision, like things like the Vision 2030 of Saudi Arabia, and similar programs which other countries have. So, and obviously integrating the BRI firmly with some of these programs, and also some sort of reference to a sort of counter to the Iran-China agreement. That will also be something which needs to be watched carefully. So, and I think it's also very important that China would also want to send out a signal that, if you look at the economic slowdown, if you look at the criticism of the BRI, if you look at the deterioration of ties with some countries, China would want to dispel that sort of notion. And if you look at the visit of the Chinese foreign minister to a number of countries, it was basically to send out the message that we still mean business. And this, obviously, GCC foreign ministers and other officials is very much in sync with that. And I think, in fact, this Friday itself, you also have a visit by Iranian and Turkish officials to China, which will further, which basically sends out a message that now, for very long, even though China was important in economic terms, it was the US which was the most important player. Now, China was also, along with the GCC countries and other countries in the Middle East, China has also realized that there's a bit of a vacuum. So let's try to fulfill that. But I don't think, given the deep-rooted strategic ties between the US and some of the GCC countries, it's going to be that easy for China to do so, especially at this point of time.
Okay, so thank you, sir, for just letting us know. I think we're going to continue this discussion next week about, let's see what pans out for the Chinese economy. Thank you so much for all the information today. Thank you. Please catch us on Global.